So
tonight
this is one stage in the process. You would bring this back to a formal meeting before you made a decision. You're not making any decisions tonight. You're not voting tonight. So it is perfectly appropriate not to take public comment.
what about consensus?
You can take
This is
consensus.
one
That's not a vote.
stage in.
Consensus is doing it.
Madam Mayor, we are live whenever you are ready to start. I apologize.
Give us. What? Quick.
I said we're live whenever you are ready to
Sure.
start the
All right.
meeting.
We're not making. Well, thank you.
My
Okay,
apologies
let's go.
for the issue.
No, that's fine. Let's go live.
Okay. Madam Mayor, it is 6:06 and we are live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City Commission work session regarding the landscaping ordinance, landscape and artificial turf. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Mayor Betty Resch,
Here.
Vice Mayor Christopher McVoy,
Here.
Commissioner Sarah Maliga,
Present.
Commissioner Kimberly Stokes,
Here.
Commissioner Ronaldo Diaz.
Here.
Thank you very much. I will lead the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Tonight, we are going to have a presentation by our staff regarding the landscaping, regarding plastic artificial turf, and a few other things that we can bring up to discuss. It's the landscape code focusing on the artificial turf.
Thank
Take it
you, Madam
away.
Mayor. For the record, Erin Sita, Assistant Director with the Department of Community Sustainability. As you stated, this is a work session regarding artificial turf and rock yards. There is an increase in local demand for low maintenance landscapes, in particular artificial turf and rock yards. Part of the reason why we're holding the work session is that the City Commission paused code compliance action regarding violations relating to ground cover and artificial turf for 90 days to be able to hold this work session. The land development regulations currently do not permit artificial turf and rock yards. It is an inclusionary code, so it does not say no artificial turf is allowed, but artificial turf is not included in the code.
I'm sorry,
So-
Erin, could you make your presentation full screen? Because we just see the slides.
Oh, we see the whole thing.
All right, I'll try to reshare it.
Can you hear her okay, Madam Clerk?
I can hear her, but when looking at the presentation on our end, we just see the slides, not the full slideshow.
Do you see it now?
Is that better?
No, it's still coming up the same way.
Hold on,
That's
there's one setting.
Here comes Anthony to save the day.
No, I have to check this.
I'll bet.
I know, can you hear me now?
Right? I took off presenter view.
So.
It does look like a Bud Light bottle. It does look like a Bud Light. That's right, you're gonna, don't get us started.
Where it is.
What we should do is
Even beer now.
over to share screen,
Mhm.
and then what you're gonna choose is. There we go.
It's full screen now.
All
Perfect.
right.
Anthony, thank you.
The rescue as always.
He is, really. And he just shows up and fixes stuff. It's amazing. Where do they learn this stuff? Yeah.
Pretty much. That's how it works.
Okay.
So our presentation outline is we'll go over some current regulations. We'll talk about the summary of what we found in our research on these issues. We'll look at some other local government requirements with regards to artificial turf. And there will be a brief presentation by Donna Kerner from the tree board on their recommendations. And then I have prepared some potential discussion questions, which you may choose to use or not use as you wish.
Thank you.
So first for our current requirements, as you know, the city landscape regulations are in section 23.6.1. We have a landscape and trees webpage. On that webpage, it links to the code. And as well, it also provides a lot of links to Florida-friendly landscaping, homeowner handouts for Florida-friendly landscaping. And the reason for this is that our landscape code is based on the Florida-friendly landscape principles. Now, these are 9 science-based principles for sustainable landscapes. They were developed by the University of Florida, IFAS Extension Office, and these are what our current regulations are based on. You may remember about 20 years ago, xeriscaping was really hot. And xeriscaping really isn't, it was really developed for a desert climate. And so the University of Florida developed the Florida-friendly principles and Florida-friendly landscape program as a response to the popularity of xeriscaping and low water landscapes for the Florida climate. So our landscape regulations are divided into 2 use categories. We have regulations specifically for single family and duplexes, and then we have regulations for multifamily and non-residential uses. And of course, in both use categories, shade trees are required. So our landscape code, just for clarity, it's always confusing. Everyone gets confused about this, is we do not require grass. What we do is we require living ground cover, and native grass covers can be used. So the standard is that it will have a finished appearance and reasonably complete coverage within 6 months based on the expected mature spread. And here are some pictures around town from some examples of folks who decided not to use turf, basically living turf or grass or sod, but instead utilized some of these alternative living ground covers that we allow and encourage within our code. Sure. So the bottom left is perennial peanut with the yellow. So the right is a juniper, and then the upper left is the Asiatic jasmine. So all residential zoning districts and the mixed use east zoning district have a requirement. So we have our landscape requirements. Now in our zoning and the zoning district requirements, we have a requirement that the lesser of 900 square feet or 75% of the front yard shall remain pervious and be landscaped. So it doesn't say you have to have grass, but it says you have to have a landscaping area in your front yard that is equivalent to 75% or 900 square feet, whichever is less. So landscape areas shall contain a maximum of 50% rock or mulch in planting beds. So originally the code only allowed for organic mulches. And so you can kind of see this picture here. Let me minimize this.
That would mean that rubber mulch wouldn't be allowed.
Rubber mulch is not permitted in our code. It's actually expressly prohibited on top of it. But you can see this landscape planting bed from the University of Florida's Florida-friendly webpage, and you can see that there is a mix of plant materials with mulch mixed in. So this is kind of an example of that 50% rule. That's the idea of what the University of Florida recommends for a Florida-friendly landscape.
I have a question about that. I did get a comment from a resident in my district previously where it was unclear how to measure that 50% because do we have clear guidance that we can give when somebody's told you're above that 50% threshold, how they can?
So it's never going to be an exact science because plants are alive and they grow and they change. Sometimes they die, right? So we try to get it about 50% as close, just kind of looking at it as what you would, as any reasonable person would approach it and look at it as it would be approximately 50%. You're never going to be, well, you fail because your landscaping is 48.5%, right? It's kind of more of a rule of thumb. We're looking for this type of plant to mulch ratio. I'll get to that in a second, but I have something I want to show you for that we've been
Yeah.
developing
Let's let her
internally
finish the.
to address that.
Thank you.
Save
So
her questions for the end.
where the rock came in is that we were getting code enforcement cases where people have rocked their whole front yard, and we were trying to get them into code compliance. And so what we did is we said, okay, well, typically before we would only allow an organic mulch. So we changed the code to allow rock as mulch so that we had these cases where we had these rock yards, we could work with the residents to retain their rock and then to add plant material to meet the 50% requirement. Now, rocks as mulch are typically not encouraged. They are in Florida friendly, but they are feasible. It's just that you just have to note that you're going to probably have to water your plants a little more because rocks do create heat stress around plants as mulch and are not the recommended mulch type. So you're probably going to need a little bit more water if you have rocks as mulch.
And just a clarification for the audience, when you say organic mulch, I was struggling with what to call it too. You mean mulch that comes from a plant origin. It doesn't have to be certified organic by the
Correct.
National Organic.
Correct. Yes.
Just so people know.
It was alive and now it is pine straw, pine bark.
And that was dead.
And now
Melaleuca bark or whatever.
It's not rubber.
eucalyptus bark, eucalyptus, there's a whole list. Currently about 67% of our city is in a residential zoning district. And so also a component of the landscape requirements was to focus on front yards as being green and tropical. And here's some little snippets courtesy of Google. And you can see when you look down a street in Lake Worth Beach, there's a lot of visible landscaping. So at the time when the code was created, it was like, okay, we want shade trees in the front yard for pedestrian shade. We want a lot of landscaping in the front to maintain these kind of green tropical corridors. There also is some positive environmental impacts from having more things that are alive in your yard. And we'll get into those in the research part. So we've been playing around with this and we want to get it more professionally, jazzed up basically. But we've been drafting some ground cover guidance by plant type so that because when you install plants, they have to have a growth period to be able to get to that coverage. And if you overplant, you'll have to then remove plants later. This is the idea is these would meet basically the requirement of full coverage for a ground cover if you planted in these specifications roughly in approximately 6 months after installation. So we are working on this to develop as a guide to work with code enforcement or code compliance, and also for residents as a guide for installation. So we're hoping to roll this out depending on direction within the next month.
How many plants are in this guide?
I think we have about 15 that are commonly installed in South Florida as ground cover.
Thank you.
Oh, right? Probably around there. I'm not. Mhm.
If you're going to speak, turn on your mic.
So what we found in the research is essentially that artificial turf and rock yards function in a similar manner to hardscape, right? The water runoff rates for artificial turf and rock yards are less than rates for living ground cover. That includes turf grass. They do not provide habitat. They do not reduce the heat island effect and are likely can contribute to it. Whereas plants and trees help contribute to the reduction in the heat island effect. Also, while these are low maintenance items, they're not without maintenance. They require cleaning and weeding and regular general maintenance. Rock yards will probably require the application of a higher level of chemical pest herbicides. Artificial turf has to be washed and cleaned. And both of these products are not recommended as a substitute to turf grass or to landscaping. Now, what we
Is-
weren't
We're gonna let her finish.
Just a little one there. You have it backwards on the first one. The water runoff rates are greater than living ground cover. It's easy to get it backwards, but the infiltration rates are,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I flipped it. Yeah. So basically you get more water runoff and less treatment if it's not alive. Right. So, so basically what I wasn't able to find were data and studies on the pros and cons that compared trees and plants to hardscape. And so I wasn't able to find that. And why I was interested in that is because really the studies show that these types of improvements function in a similar manner to other types of hardscapes and have similar and can potentially have similar impacts. What comes to mind is the difficulty in recycling asphalt, and the reutilization of asphalt is similar to the struggles that people are facing with recycling issues caused, or the lack of recycling availability for artificial turf. So focusing on rock yards, again, just to hit on the thing, there's the rocks increase heat on plants' roots, which can stress plants. They don't support having rock yards. And this is not rock as mulch, but this is rock in a large yard or a large area of just only rock. Trees and plants also help cool the environment. Are a simple way to reduce heat island effect. You still have to maintain them and clean them just like anything. They are low maintenance, but they are not without maintenance. We're seeing the information that I looked at artificial turf was that artificial turf was probably lasting between 10 to 20 years for a residential application. It depends on where it's installed, the sun. Some residential applications are getting as much as 20 years now. So that's just where it is. The biggest, the turf that lasts the shortest amount of time is basically the recreational turf. And that seems to have a lifespan typical between 8 to 10 years for recreational turf or turf in like higher traffic areas. So again, pros, turf maintains its color and appearance, but it can be worn down. It can be torn and damaged. There are no fertilizers or pest treatments, but there are chemicals that are used to wash it. And it does not allow the growth because there's no root system, there's no microbial community, and there's less water filtration benefit when compared to turf grass. It is lower maintenance. It does use less water, but it is not without water use because turf can get very hot. And so many people wash the turf, and then they also have to spray the turf sometimes if it's used in an area where there's a lot of sun to cool the turf down before it can be used. And then that evaporates. Again, it has to be raked and washed. You kind of have to comb the turf's hair, because of animal feces, bird feces, debris, different things like that. There's a chemical you use, you basically wash it like a shampoo. It's like a shampoo for your grass, and it kills like all the bacteria or anything that would be left that would decay. There are less toxic products on the market, and there's a lot more alternative fill now available to rubber crumb. In fact, residential application of turf no longer utilizes rubber crumb at all. As a standard practice in the United States, it's typically used a silica sand. There's also an organic fill that's like a coconut husk, something that can be used as an alternate fill. The folks who may still be using crumb rubber are related to more of the recreation utilization for sports fields and things like that. And that's where you're going to get those microplastics and micro things that basically are taken off when you use it and then wash off. But for the most part, it's pretty much using sand now as fill. Some products are made from some of the turf products are made from recycled plastics, but artificial turf is not in itself recyclable. Recyclable. And there are companies in California that are recycling, they're reusing more than recycling entire sports fields. So they basically take a sports field and they patch it up and then they modify it a little bit and they sell it to people. And it was really cute. Their disclaimer on their website is, this may have markings from a sports field on it. So your yard could have like a 20-yard line mark on it. They are. But just like the asphalt roads, there's a lot of extra turf in places. It's just the same thing. It's the same issue we're facing with asphalt roads because you have to replace the roads, you dig up the roads, there's whole,
What do you do with
basically areas of storage of asphalt because there's no place to put it. So it's like I said, they share a lot of commonalities. So it is semi-pervious when it is installed correctly, but it is not fully pervious the way soil and landscaping are. And if incorrectly installed, this can pull water, which can cause mosquito issues and other health issues. So it's very important that this is installed correctly. So we surveyed 11 local governments in Palm Beach County to see if they allowed artificial turf. We chose the largest local governments and local governments that were proximate to our city. 8 of the 11 currently allow turf. 2 of the 3 that do not allow turf are currently reviewing the issue. And that's because it's just become so popular. Local governments are experiencing a lot of pressure to allow artificial turf. Common regulations where turf is permitted in Palm Beach County, it is typically treated as a hardscape. There is a visual performance specification, the look, the pile height, the tufted weight. Some even, you can even go as far as saying you need a brown blade per every green blade. I mean, you could get really deep into this if you wanted to. There are material grade requirements that would meet U.S. safe disposal standards in a landfill because a lot of this will end up in a landfill. There is a drainage review requirement, and it is most typically allowed in single family inside and rear yards. It is also allowed in recreation or common areas in residential development. So we have the tree board member here. If you want to get up and make a presentation.
Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
Donna Kerner, chair of the tree board. So I'm just going to read, and a lot of it is.
Can you pull the?
Is it on?
Press the power button.
Press the power
On
button.
the top somewhere.
Do I have that, William? Yes, I do.
no.
Okay, hi,
Pull it
everybody.
Down a little bit so we can.
Hi, everybody. Donna Kerner, chair of the tree board, and I'm speaking on behalf of us who are here and those who are not on the board. So I'm just going to read, and a lot of it is consistent with what Aaron just said. But what my purpose now is to let you know that we met March 16th. We reviewed the previous draft, section 23.6-1. Landscape regulations on artificial turf, ground cover mulch, inorganic mulch. And we discussed the pros and cons for each. And we reached positions that are being mentioned tonight for the City Commission workshop. So first off, we looked at artificial turf. We reviewed the previously disapproved artificial turf ordinance and had a really lengthy conversation about the pros and cons of allowing artificial turf to be installed. And the board, after lots of discussion, we approved a motion to continue the prohibition on artificial turf and to add language to the ordinance to specifically state that artificial turf is prohibited. I know that it's inclusionary and that's part of the discussion, but we feel strongly that people don't know and they are asking questions and they just said, well, I don't see it in the ordinance. We want to state it clearly that it's prohibited. And our position that we've taken is based on the University of Florida, the IFAS, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Principles, say that 5 times quick, which doesn't consider artificial turf Florida friendly or environmentally acceptable. So the experts, and Aaron referred to many of the studies, they say it holds in heat and raises the temperature of neighborhoods. These are these heat islands that we referred to, and allows microscopic toxic petroleum pollutants. And these are the PFAS chemicals and compounds. It allows them to seep into the soil and the water table. It kills the beneficial bacteria and microorganisms underneath. and it has absolutely no wildlife benefit. It collects animal feces. It can't or won't be recycled because the man-made plastic materials are bound together, making it impossible to separate them. It needs cleaning and maintaining. So contrary to the advertising that it's maintenance-free, it's not. And it's an awful substitute for conscientious, natural xeriscaping. So that's artificial turf. We then moved on to the discussion about ground covers. We discussed code section 23.6.1, parentheses C, parentheses 1, parentheses E. All other lots, areas not covered by driveway or structures shall be planted with living ground cover or other approved materials. So basically, the board came to the position that we support the existing ordinance that ground cover is required. And there was a motion approved to add a sentence to the end of this section, which is section K, which is landscape design standards, which says all other lot areas not covered by driveways or structures shall be planted with living ground cover or other approved landscape materials. Then we moved on to discuss code section 23.6-1, parentheses K, parentheses 10, ground covers. And there was a motion approved to change the word turf to grass and to strike the last sentence, which is all ground cover areas must be kept free from weeds, because we basically said weeds have a beneficial quality. They have flowers, they're pollinators, and it's not necessary to keep the ground cover areas free from weeds. We moved on to organic mulches, and we discussed code section 23.1-1, parentheses K, parentheses 12, organic mulches, and a motion was approved to add the following sentence: no more than 50% of a front or side street setback or yard may be comprised of mulch independent of living plant materials. And here's the sentence: including but not limited to shrubs and ground covers, trees and palms shall not count towards this requirement. Last section that we covered was inorganic mulches. The board discussed code section 23.6, paren K, paren 13, inorganic mulches. The board said that rock, which is considered an inorganic mulch, is not Florida friendly. And we want rocks to have the same requirement as organic mulches. So properties using rocks must also have 50% coverage with shrubs and ground cover. And then when we made a motion to approve to combine the organic and inorganic code sections into one section with the same plant requirements. And so general, and then there was the artificial grass pros and cons. I think that got included in the packet. It did. So I'm not going to take the time then to read it. So it's already there. But in our mind, there are so many more cons to pros. But just one thing to also add in that inorganic, or I'm sorry, artificial turf, artificial grass, it's really expensive. And if you look through the studies and if you look through the research for a regular size lawn, it's upwards of $10,000.
But if they want, I mean, if it's allowed and they want to spend it.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it's not an inexpensive substance. So general comments we want to make is that, you know, as Aaron was already saying, I wasn't aware of that we can make recommendations for appropriate ground covers as a tree board to replace turf or to add it to your yards. Great to know, Aaron, that you're going to be having a guide for that. And also, we just wanted to add that using Florida-friendly principles, you can add water to your lawn. You can water your lawn more effectively to reduce costs. And many people water far too much. It's not critical to have perfect looking grass. And many of us on the tree board, we have a nice combination of lawn and landscape beds with mulch. So that's it. And I thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a quick question, Ms. Kerner. Thank you.
Sure.
And thank you for the tree board and every volunteer that comes in and helps the city. Was there any discussion about later in the discussion, there's going to be some photographs of uses, you know, in between paving bricks and around, you know, limited use. Was that discussed by the tree board?
We did discuss it. I mean, I would say that the majority of us are saying we want to have a ban. I mean, if I would just kind of say, we discussed limited uses, but overwhelming majority of us want to ban it altogether.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Legge, I think was first. We're
Thank
gonna-
you. That was
we're
actually
gonna
my-
just kind of have some
That was
questions for
actually my
Donna.
question. This slide was not shown.
We're not there yet.
That slide was actually from a previous, that was from the previous one, when we get to the artificial
I don't
turf.
think we're there yet.
Yeah. Oh.
Um,
this is in the
discussions.
Middle of the summary, so I didn't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, so basically, that's it. That's what the data says, is that it's kind of, it functions more like a hardscape. So, and a lot of people allow it. It is very popular, but they allow it in a way which has standards for contaminants, standards for performance, and
Well, you said 8 out of the 11 allow it, but that, and then you kind of followed up with it and said, with, some side yards, backyards, it's not. I want to be as concise as we can tonight without all of us going back with the pros and cons, because I think we all know that there are pros and cons. And I sort of wonder if we have we updated? I was gonna make a phone call to a guy that then a citizen suggested I talk to, and I didn't get a chance to do it, about the more recent improvements to this, this is from a couple of years ago, from 20, when you started working on it. So I just think that it would behoove us to take a little bit look at what improvements may have been made. So would it be helpful? All right, let's just go through the question. I know like it was
So
first.
that was my question is,
right.
so
So
take that out because you weren't,
right. Well, I just put that slide in because that's what we had discussed. So I think what our thought was, should it be allowed? Should it be treated as hardscape? And where should it go if it's allowed?
Mhm.
And I will just go forward a little bit. And in our 2020, what we said was, as part of Exhibit G, was that this is where we thought it should be allowed at the time, if it was going to be allowed. And one was in single family and duplex properties in the rear yard only, not visible from the right of way. And that was based on public input and commissioner input at the time. Like, you guys are a whole different commission, a whole different public, a whole different time. All of this, if you were to allow it, could change. It's completely customizable to your direction. So, we thought also there's a lot of basically areas in the city where we have old, like non-conforming multifamily properties where the whole front is completely paved.
Mhm.
And so what we came up with the idea in 2020 was like, wouldn't it be, if we're going to allow it, wouldn't it be better to see artificial at a strip driveway with artificial turf between the strips or rock between the strips to allow more water to absorb, as opposed to being completely impervious wall to wall and not and just be a solid concrete along the entire front of the
Okay,
yard.
so are you suggesting that, I apologize, I know the lights are on, but are you suggesting that if somebody had a driveway from some, 1940, that they would now be made to cut strips on it?
No, this is for multifamily. So sometimes people,
Well, I mean, are two, they're multifamilies, they have driveways, and so same
Right.
question.
so they come periodically, they come in to completely, if they have an asphalt pavement over their entire front property,
Right,
they have to come back in periodically and dig up the asphalt and redo it. It's what is it, like a 20 or 30-year life improvement? It's just something that has to
Right.
happen. So when they come in,
right, so that's what you're suggesting, when there's a time to improve it, not that we're gonna go out and go, uh-oh, you've got a driveway that you've got to, okay.
it was permissive. So it was like, if you wanted to do this, we could allow for this,
Mhm.
this option, which would allow a more pleasant visual corridor than wall to wall asphalt.
Right,
That was one of the ideas that was floated at the time. And we said rooftop terraces or as part of a plan development in a recreation or amenity area. And again, at the time, we treated it and we thought about it then as it is a hardscape. So if it was going to be in residential, our thoughts were that it would have to comply with the impermeable surface
right.
requirements.
Mhm.
It would have, so there's a limited, so whatever you could cover your yard with a patio, your backyard with a patio,
You could
whatever
cover
you
with
have,
that.
you could have the option to utilize.
But there are limits on how much impervious surfaces you can have in any yard.
Yes.
Right.
And all zoning districts.
So
we have
this,
a
right, so this would count towards your impervious area.
Right.
Okay. Okay, is that it?
no,
Then you turn out your light.
no, it's not it.
Oh, it's not it. Well, then keep going.
You said, is that it? I
All
said,
right,
no.
keep going.
So it's funny, after we had the very first conversation, the person who was renting one bay next to my new location in Lantana decided that he was gonna roll out some artificial turf, not properly installed, over leaves, not professionally done. So I was like, let me look into this. Because his idea was to do like a little play area. I just want to go on the record that I think that what you laid out here in Exhibit G is kind of where I was leaning.
Right.
Because to me, what people do in their backyards is pretty much, it's their backyards. I don't want to see somebody completely roll out a big roll of artificial turf and not have it installed the correct way, because then the neighbors have to deal with that as well, or the new homeowner. So I like what you laid out in Exhibit G. I'm in favor of that. When the Bohemian got reprimanded for putting in
Yeah.
artificial turf around their pool, I'm like, if I'm installing a pool, I might want artificial turf in between my brick pavers. It kind of makes sense. So I'm in favor of what you proposed. I thank staff for all the hard work that you've done. I know it's a very contentious conversation right now. I told the city manager I almost made a dress out of artificial turf and wore it today with some little plastic flowers just to make everybody laugh. Because I think that this is something serious, but it's also something that we have to say, okay, 8 out of 11 communities around us are doing this. Do we want to be that one city that says no for all the money? You're spending the money on it. And as somebody who has an entire yard that I have to pay for irrigation, and my yard is huge. And when they built it, they put in all sod. Between paying for my landscaper and my water and the irrigation system when it has to be fixed, if you don't have all of those abilities to pay for that, it's cost hindering. So I like being able to give homeowners an option, right? So I mean, I'm in favor of what you guys did. Thank you for your hard work. I like where this is going. I think in small quantities, it makes sense for people to be able to do it in their backyard and on the side of the yard and in dog parks. Why wouldn't we have it at dog areas? That's another thing. I'm like, who wants to not be able to clean up a dog area? So I'm in favor of it. Thank you guys for your hard work.
I have a question. When you see an Exhibit G, single family and duplex properties and not visible from the right of way, but that still would be subject to the hardscape
Yes.
requirements. It's
Yes.
not like you can.
Right. So
Right.
with the time, and this was an excerpt from a presentation we did in 22. We did where, how, and what.
Okay, I just want to make sure, I don't want to take much time on that, but that's just my question. It's not.
No,
So
at the time when we had looked at this issue, we had proposed it to be consistent with the zoning requirements
You
and
should put it
functionally
in here.
treated as hardscape.
If it comes to us for a vote, okay. Mr. McVoy was next.
Yeah, with your permission, Mayor, I'm going to ask for a little bit extra time because in this case, I actually am a subject matter expert in this area. As many of you know, I am Dr. McVoy. What people might not know is that my PhD is in soil physics, which is the movement of chemicals and water through soils, through porous materials. Much of my research here has focused on a portion of soils, which is the most relevant, which is soil organic matter, widely recognized as an important indicator of soil health. So before we get a little further, I liked a lot of what was presented. A few things I would add to it. What I want to point out is that although what we're saying we're talking about is artificial turf, what we're really looking at is soil, and particularly the organic soil parts of it. I'm going to throw a few quotes out of perspective from folks that have been thinking about soil for quite a while. A Sanskrit text from 1500 says, "Upon this handful of soil, our survival depends." They were thinking about that a long time ago. Thomas Jefferson also did. While the farmer holds the title to the land, actually it belongs to all the people because civilization itself rests upon soil. Franklin Roosevelt also thought about it. The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. About a third of the world's soil has been degraded. And the FAO in 2015 pointed out, soil destruction creates a vicious circle in which less carbon is stored. This brings it back to soil organic matter. The world gets hotter and the land is further degraded because the more you heat it up, the more you lose organic carbon. So why is artificial turf relevant to soil and soil organic carbon? Because plastic grass, let's call it what it is, plastic grass destroys soil organic matter. That's the fundamental problem with it. Who cares? Why do we care about soil organic matter? Because it's the organic fraction of the soil that makes our sand livable. Soil organic matter is what lets rainfall sink quickly into the soil, reducing runoff and protecting our lagoon. Soil organic matter is what purifies the infiltrating water, protecting the aquifer underneath. I'm going to call it SOM because that's what soil scientists do. SOM, soil organic matter, is what stores nutrients, allowing plants to grow and feeding a whole ecosystem. Soil organic matter is also what makes integrated pest management possible. If you look in the IFAS thing, they'll talk about, people say, well, artificial turf uses less pesticides. Well, that's a mixed bag because you have nothing, you've got no habitat there, you've got no beneficial insects, and now you're not getting some of the integrated pest management benefits because of that. Soil organic matter, along with roots, is what stops erosion. Many of you know that we have a whole batch of people in the city whose job is to clean out the storm drains. And a big part of what they're doing is cleaning out sand out. You want to limit erosion. You don't do that very well with something that's not alive. Soil organic matter is also what stores water, supporting life, and as was pointed out, helps cool the city, actively cools it because of the plants and evapotranspiration. In contrast, plastic grass, artificial turf, kills soil organic matter. It's a waste of oil products. Years ago, my undergraduate advisor spent a lot of time thinking about peak oil and what makes sense to do with the remaining oil that we have left. And he pointed out, you want to be using it for things that you are difficult to do otherwise. Plastic piping, PVC piping, is probably a pretty high value use of that oil. Artificial turf is a real waste of what is now a limited resource, underground oil. Artificial turf degrades. It's not just the rubber underneath, it's the material itself. Everything in Florida falls apart sooner or later. Microplastics is a major concern to waterways. That stuff makes its way into the lagoon. Heavy metals also comes out of it. It heats. We've already talked about that. We've talked about pesticide use. It's not water use free, as was pointed out, both for cooling and for cleaning, and cleaning is not insignificant. And you can't recycle this stuff. What about alternatives? Are there alternatives? And I'm very happy to hear that Aaron is working, and I imagine David's helping, imagine the tree board too. Let's help people know what are alternatives in terms of living ground covers. And plant-based mulch, organic mulch, plant-based mulch. The idea being that that stuff degrades, becomes soil organic matter. It's rebuilding that. In Florida with the heat, if you don't build soil organic matter, you wind up with white sand. Go down to Hypoluxo, to the scrub area there, some of the other ones around. It turns to pretty much just sand particles, and that does no filtration, does no runoff protection. I would agree with the recommendation of the tree board that the best thing to do is simply, this does not have redeeming virtues and it's got a whole string of negatives. I would say ban it altogether because there are alternatives that are perfectly reasonable. The best advice from Florida Friendly is clear. It's not a good use. And so I'll stop there. If it's the will of the commission as a whole to not go for an outright ban, then I would come back with some of the things that I would want to see as regulations. But my recommendation is go with an outright ban.
Thank you, Commissioner Diaz.
We have to be the only commission that has a literal soil scientist on board.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'd lean more towards the tree board recommendations for sure. I will put out there though, I'm not really interested in punishing people who have plastic grass now because of I tend to agree. There could have been some more clarity and more understanding and communication on that regard. But there are better alternatives, and I'm looking at the ones presented in Exhibit G, like the lines on a driveway, cut driveway, that sort of thing. And I've always been curious of this, is why, pea gravel isn't deemed a better choice in that regard, because it's not plastic, which plastic, no matter, how resilient they say it is. It breaks down under UV rays. And I had recently a FAU PhD student who's doing research on microplastics in the Lake Worth Lagoon present her data at a recent thing I organized. And it's concerning what's out there. I mean, short version, if you eat fish, you have plastic in your body, and you consume something about like a credit card size monthly. It's a lot, and we don't want to contribute more to that. And I think this town really prides itself on being environmentally friendly and having that kind of tools on regard. So, like I said, I'm more interested in looking at the landscape code as a whole, not just looking at plastic grass, because I think it's really important for us to provide alternatives. And I love the guidelines, that one-page example as a starter. Things like, I look at these driveways and I just think if that was if me in that situation, you definitely want a driveway, you definitely don't want tall plants, but I would go for pea gravel because you don't have the plastic use, you don't have the chemical use that, as Aaron described, kills bacteria. Well, not all bacteria is awful for us. A lot of it, in fact, the vast majority of them are beneficial. And when it comes to cleaning out our Lake Worth Lagoon from runoff pollution, that is generally what we're talking about, the good bacteria that's in the soil. So if you're willfully spraying, Simple Green or whatever chemical to kill that bacteria because, you want a clean surface, the water that does go through that sand and plastic grass, sure, it's not going into the street, into the storm drain, but it's being given this exception from this natural process that would clean that water before it goes into our aquifer. So polluted water is polluted water, phosphorus and nitrogen, cleaning chemicals, whatever it is, if it's going into our aquifer, it's a problem and we should move away from it. Pea gravel and rocks are not, amazing alternatives in a driveway. I feel like they're perfect in this regard. Weeding, we could have a whole conversation on my feelings on the use of the word weeds, because in food foresting and others, we call that a 4-letter word because it's just a plant that isn't where we want it to be. It doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. So I really appreciate that recommendation of removing that prohibition. Things like Biden's alba and all these things that we generally consider weeds are often the only pollinators at certain times of year for things like our native bees and whatnot. And plus, if you use pea gravel in a driveway, you get to use my favorite tool to remove plants, which is a literal propane flamethrower. So it's a lot cleaner. You're not introducing pollutants, and you get some stress relief from it. So yeah, I mean, as a whole, in terms of direction, like Vice Mayor McVoy said, we should really be thinking about the bacteria and the mycelium and all the good stuff that needs to exist in that soil underneath. The thing that, mulch and all the other alternatives will protect, that plastic grass won't protect, rocks don't protect as well. But, between the two, I would rather see something where we encourage people to use rocks than the alternative. And I would love, for us to revisit our ratio of mulch to plants, because I think there's a level of flexibility that needs to be worked in there to provide people more options, more flexibility. Not a lot. There's a handful of houses all throughout Lake Worth that have these incredible banyan trees. There's one, just north of Sunset Ridge, your house. Your house they're beautiful, and you're sure as heck not going to grow anything underneath it. And plastic grass is
I'm the
tempting.
queen of bromeliads.
Right. Bromeliads are great. Plastic grass is tempting, but I think in that regard, mulch is a perfect and acceptable alternative to that. So, offering that kind of flexibility as a whole would just be better for environment and for homeowners. And then also, I'm curious if you came across research on the carcinogenic nature of plastic grass, because they are petroleum products. I mentioned also the UV degradation in sun, because we do also allow this is gonna be opening up another can of worms, but the fake plants on the side of buildings, I'm not particularly a fan of because they are plastic and they're subjected to sun and they break down and leach chemicals. So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. I have a few thoughts. I have a
I
few.
too, well, I didn't feel
There
like
you
I
go.
I was just gonna wait my turn.
Okay.
But I agree with most of what I'm hearing, that the large coverage of it just doesn't seem like something that we want to do. And even it seems like the other municipalities that are doing it, several of them was very limited use cases, not really recommending large areas of your backyard. I understand that the argument of, well, I could put a concrete patio in there. That's been my biggest struggles. Like if I were going to put a whole concrete patio in there, is it really that different? But I think most people visually wouldn't choose to cover all of that land with a patio and I don't know, I think they're two different people wanting a patio or wanting the artificial turf. The people that want the artificial turf would probably replace it with living ground cover, not a patio. So I'm not really, I don't really have a desire to open up large areas for that use. But then the driveway is, you're going to have a driveway. No matter what, you're going to have a driveway. So is that acceptable? You know, is this what the picture we're seeing on the right any worse than just having a completely covered concrete driveway or pavers or whatever else? But then I understand the concern about the recyclability and the use of the plastics and all that other stuff. And what I am also very concerned with, like Commissioner Diaz said, is the amount of money that people in our community, because of not being clear, whatever confusion was out there, they've invested all this money in their artificial turf and they invest money in their property to make it look nice and everything. And I feel terrible about that. So I wonder if we opened it up for a very limited use case, like a driveway, is that going to, the people don't sit around and watch every city commission meeting and follow what's going on. They see, oh, my neighbor has artificial turf, it must be allowed. And is it going to help like add to the perception that it's allowed? Like if that's the only place we allow it, is it really worth it to create that extra confusion? That's where I struggle with that. So I am more interested in trying to figure out how we can help people come into compliance and how we can work with people that are not meeting our code. I think Director Waters mentioned at one point, even if we passed some of these new proposals, the majority of the people that are out of compliance right now would not come into compliance. So we're really not helping the issue. We're just opening it up and, in my opinion, creating further confusion by having all these different limited use cases. And I just don't see the big benefit of that. And I know other cities are, I always think it's nice to look at what other cities are doing, but I also think it's nice when we feel like we're leaders when it comes to promoting the health of our soil and the health of our communities, and we are passing regulations that are beneficial.
So what's your
whole.
position?
I really don't see, I'm open to hearing exactly what people would want to allow, but I don't feel comfortable of changing our ban, which is already confusing to people, into allowing very limited use cases. I just think that's going to cause more confusion and it's not going to help the majority of the people that are out of compliance right now. So I think we should continue where we are, but I think we need to work together to figure out how we can either give people more time or something to get people into compliance and understand that I don't think it's an emergency that everybody goes out and gets into compliance in a limited amount of time. I think we can be flexible with how we deal with that issue, but I don't think opening it up is the right way to go.
My turn now.
Yeah, so it seems like,
No, it's my turn now.
what's that?
It's my turn.
Oh,
now.
okay.
Then you can go.
Mhm.
Everyone has to speak before a person can speak a second time. I read the rule. Okay, I have a couple. First thing I want to do is take issue with the comment that sod is not required. I mean, it's not required. We know that it's not required, but I will say in perfect candor, and it's not a surprise to anybody, I spent many, many years dealing with my clients with the city, and code enforcement officers told them to put sod down and insisted that it be sod, and it was a constant problem, and I hope that's being resolved. And I don't like to call things out in public, but it was a real bone of contention for a long time. You know, ground cover is one thing, sod is another. So people were having to put in, and I mean, sod to me is like the least of, efficient. So that's my little rant. So my feeling is if we have a percentage, let's say on a yard, if there's a percentage of what you're allowed to have as an impermeable surface, if we include artificial grass within that impermeable percentage, what harm? I mean, we're talking about impermeable anyway. So instead of having concrete, they have artificial grass. They want to have, when I look at those pictures, and the ones that look extreme, but I mean, if we have impermeable rules, then count that as an impermeable service. I don't support front lawns being plastic. Sorry, I just don't. And I don't think any city really does allow that. What we do with the people that have already done that is the next question, but we can figure that one out. So my feeling is, and there was the thing about, that Donna brought out, all lots shall be planted, but what percentage? I mean, the entire percentage is, there's so many uncertainties with this kind of stuff. So my feeling is, I'm sure that Mr. McVoy has a lot of very specific, things that he has looked at about requirements for the permeability and all that. And I have no problem with, regulations of what kind you have. So I think that the ordinance needs to be extremely specific about what the requirements are. And if it's impermeable, it's impermeable, whether it's concrete or grass. And if you want to have, around your pool, if you want to have a place out in the back, I mean, I think with the Bohemian, that was sort of a bad example. They've had plastic grass in between their stepping stones around the pool, and we're like, no, you can't do that. I think that was an unfortunate moment. But so that's my feeling. I don't think we need to be completely drastic about we're banning it or we're not banning it. We're going to count it as impermeable stuff and use it where you have an impermeable where it's allowed. No expansion of it or no reduction of it. But for people that currently have, and I know there are a few in here in the city that have, because of the confusion or whatever, do have front lawns that are now plastic. I don't know why anybody would do that, but that's okay. Not my choice. So I think that would be a separate question about how do we, what do we grandfather them in for a couple of years? Do we give them a few years? I don't know. Maybe shake your heads. I mean, I think I don't know. So I'm not. I really don't. I don't like the idea of plastic front lawns. I would never support that. That they be there. So, but that would be that's just another question. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think we need to be more specific, and I like the chart with the ground cover. We really need to be more proactive with what we're doing as ground cover. And some people love the lawn of, I'm all bromeliads and trees, but not everybody wants that. It's the easiest thing to do. You just throw them on the ground and they spread. So, that's where I'm sort of coming from, is that, it's just treat it what it is. It's impermeable. If you can have 50%, then have 50%. I believe Mr. Diaz was next.
And treating it impermeable is fine. It doesn't really address the fact that it's still leaching plastic and petroleum product into the aquifer. That's part of the issue.
Well, I think that's what Mr. McVoy is going to get into in terms of, what the improvements that they've made. I would think.
Yeah, like I think we kind of said it, and Commissioner Stokes said it too, is I think it sounds like we're more interested in helping people come in compliance. That doesn't necessarily mean in compliance with plastic grass. It means with other alternatives that can be used. And I think this is really timely, because if you look at the news and what's happening in Broward County, right, which is a heavily paved county, and stormwater management is a very real thing, especially coming out of years of drought and La Nina years. And
But if
Um,
if it's in the, if it's in the allowed permeable area, it's not going to make a difference.
it
I mean,
can
it's not going to
though.
plastic, it's, I understand
Right.
that argument, but I mean, if it's
Uh,
concrete or
It,
plastic.
it can though, because living ground cover is going to be much better at fighting the.
Yes, no,
Yeah,
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, if half of my, if 50% of my yard can be, I could put a concrete slab on it,
right.
but I don't want to do that. I want to put plastic or artificial turf down instead. And the city will treat it as impermeable surface. We haven't encroached on the permeable surface.
Right. But what I'm saying for those situations, it would be better, or, Aaron and William will have to work on this, but how do we encourage that in those situations to use a non-plastic alternative like pea gravel to, separate out the segmented driveways, which are phenomenal. I think those are much better than, please, Commissioner Stokes, don't pave your entire backyard. Like, between the
You're just
option,
completely-
we want to help people make a much more conscious decision. And so in those impermeable allowable circumstances, the better option would be, pea gravel or something that.
But we don't want to dictate to people, you may only use this. I think if we give them.
But we do dictate to people that you can't pollute, right? You can't leave garbage out on the street because, well, absolute prohibition is like never to, what law is 100% effective?
I'm gonna just counter a little bit with, if I was gonna say yard and I wanted to look at it, something green that my kids could play or my dog could play at, pea stone is not what I want to send them out into.
No, that would be more like appropriate for a driveway, but if it was a play area, you have things like pine needle mulch, which is like you can literally run around barefoot on.
But
And there's options out there, and
again, there is an allowable that word, impervious.
yes, and
area.
and what I'm trying to say is through like the recommendations in the guidebook and things like that, we want to help encourage homeowners to, make better decisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not use all their impervious areas. I mean, that would be the answer. Okay. Ms. Malega?
Thank you. So I agree with you, Madam Mayor, that if we're impervious, and I personally would rather see those pictures than, the one on the left is horrible. Please do not put down a roll of green fake grass. But if you're going to put out pavers or you're going to put out stone and you're going to do impermeable, I think this should be an option. Sometimes I feel as though government reach is a little too hard. And if this is people's backyards, and this is where, I know people who walk around completely nude in their backyards in this city and have showers and do crazy things in their backyards. We're not telling them not to do that. So I just feel that, again, I wrote down animals and kids because I literally, when you were saying I love pea gravel for a driveway, but not in my backyard.
Right.
Not where my children are going to play or my dog's going to go out. And a lot of people want to do a dog run with artificial turf. The one that has the coconut underneath is really big amongst animal owners because I won't get into details of what dogs do on those grasses.
We all know.
They poop,
The poop happens.
and
Poop
that means you
happens.
got to clean it.
But again, if a
Like
dog
any
owner
other
would,
poop you have to clean up.
if a dog owner would rather do that and instead of having their animal go out in this pouring rain and have to get muddy and dirty and then track that into their house. And if it's within our impervious
Allotment.
allotment, I'm okay with that. Again, toy tot, top play areas, dog areas. I think there are sections, especially for planned developments, where it will make sense. And I hear you. Anyone who comes to my yard is all green. We spend way too much money on plants and foliage and stuff that costs me too much money to maintain and too much money to keep alive. Thank you for the rain. I don't have a lot of impervious ground cover, so I'm not up here fighting for something that I have in my own yard. I'm just saying that when it comes to government and people's homes, some of the constraints that we put on people, if somebody wants to spend that money to do that to their yard, and if it's in a small amount, then it doesn't make sense. Do I think we should be tearing out 100-year-old trees to put in artificial turf? No. Do I think that we should be tearing up people's backyards and saying, go ahead and do what's on the left screen? No, I'm saying there's got to be a balance. And that's what's wrong in my world right now. I look at the world and I say, everything is not black and white. There has to be a commonality. There has to be a what's good for everybody, not what's good for me. And so I'm trying to, as a commissioner, think, okay, we have people in this community that are all over the spectrum on what they may want their yards to look like, what they want to do for the environment. And I am all about Christopher McVoy, the soil scientist, writing guidelines to help us say, okay, if we're going to do this, it needs to be installed by these kind of certified people. It's got to be able to go into the waste pile. I mean, we need to be hard and factual on, if you're going to do it in our city, we're going to make you do it the right way. But we have to look at the whole city, and everything is not black and white like every news channel wants you to think it is. There is a happy medium. There is a meeting of the minds. So I think that that's our job as a commission, is to say, okay, what's good for the entire community? We have people who are already dealing with the fact that they've laid this stuff down and they're not in compliance, and they may have an entire front yard that now they got to figure out, how are they going to spend the money? Where are they going to repurpose this? We don't want them to rip that out and just go throw it in the dump. If they can repurpose it or sell it to their neighbor and recoup some of that money. I mean, that's, to me, I'm really trying to be as fair about this as possible. And trust me, I don't want to pull up to someone's house and see an entire plastic front grass. I don't like that. That's why my yard looks the way it is. But I don't think that what I want should be projected onto every resident in the city. This has to be a meeting of the minds, and it's got to be something that's fair and equitable for all people in the city.
Okay. Mr. McVoy.
I think we should start by going the direction that's already been alluded to, that the issue of what we do with people who, for whatever reasons, are not in compliance now, we should set that aside,
Right.
deal with that somehow.
Right.
And that shouldn't be an influence
Right.
on
That's
our regulations going forward. I appreciate the comment on, government maybe shouldn't overreach. Government does all sorts of regulations. When government said, we're not going to regulate drywall, all sorts of people for a period of time had drywall that their houses became worthless because we relaxed the regulations on it. When you relax the regulations on lead paint in kids' toys, kids have a lot of lead in their bodies and neurological things. If you relax the regulations on lead in pipes, people have neurological problems. Sometimes there is a black and white. The black and white on artificial turf is that there are no environmental benefits to it and a whole string of problems. No, that's not an opinion. No, that's not an opinion. That's a false thing.
all right. Let's not
Did
get.
you read the IFAS?
Sir,
Okay,
Mr. McVoy and Miss Malega.
Okay.
Let's keep it. Let's keep it
I'm
one at a time.
so I hear the comment, which is, I think, not unreasonable, that if you're going to allow a certain amount of impervious, how does concrete compare to plastic grass? And the answer is, in terms of permeability of water going down in the ground, you could argue that it's similar. Obviously, not much goes through concrete. What does go through the grass is not doing the aquifer underneath any good. So it's a little worse that you have what the stuff's made out of, not good, that it has to be recycled, not good. There's not much you can do with it. And it does degrade. The microplastics issue is something that is well recognized around the world as a big deal. That we use way too much plastic. It degrades outside, inside, but a lot more outside, especially in South Florida. And so that is all contributing to the load going down our storm drains and winding up in the intercoastal. It is reasonable for us as a community to say, hey, we actually do care about the environment, and this does not have redeeming virtues to it, and it does have a string of problems. So we don't think it's a very good idea. I think the analysis that was made by Commissioner Stokes that, well, if we start making small adjustments and let you do a little of this and a little of that, it's not helping the people who are already way out of compliance. And it is sending a mixed message to the community that, well, it's sort of okay, and my neighbor kind of does it, so maybe I can do it. And we get more situations of people out of compliance, and we got to deal with even more of that. I think that argument has some merit to it, that it might be better just to say, let's not do it. Madam Mayor, maybe I misspoke earlier and you were optimistic that I was going to have some suggestions of how to do it. And I think Commissioner Malega alluded to that a little bit also. Well, maybe if we do it the right way, then it's not as harmful. No, there isn't any. The permeability aspect is partly the turf grass itself, the fake plastic, and it's partly what you do to prepare the ground to put it on it. Not the rubber crumbs, we're not doing that, but you have to compact it. And so that reduces your permeability as well. So one could say, well, why don't we use the standard that it needs to have 30 inches an hour of permeability? That's measured on just the plastic. You hang it up on the wall and you squirt a hose at it and see, well, do I get 30 inches equivalent through that? That's not the relevant thing. The relevant is, what does it do when you install it? And the answer there is going to be, it's not going to infiltrate much. Most of it's going to run off. When it runs off, it's going to carry all whatever poop got left on there. It's going to carry whatever microplastics. The stuff is degrading. It does. You know, it's not just the stuff underneath, it's the actual plastic itself. That's why people who study oceans and coastal waters call it microplastics, because it's stuff coming apart from all the plastic we use. People are spending a lot of energy, various parts of the world saying, hey, maybe plastic straws is not a good idea. Maybe plastic bottles is not a good idea. Maybe a variety of plastics is not, because all of those contribute to the load. If you go look at Keep America Beautiful, which you might think, well, that's just folks that want to make it look nice. They have a very big part of their focus of what they encourage and discourage is based on microplastics and the runoff aspect. We are a coastal city right on the lagoon. All of our drains go to the lagoon. So it is not unreasonable for us to say, hey, government makes regulations about all sorts of things. As you pointed out, people take naked showers in their backyard. That's fine. It has no environmental problems to it. You might not like it. I might like it. Somebody might like it, but it doesn't have any problem to it. Especially if you're doing it on soil where you've got organic matter and all your soap is going to just get eaten up by those bacteria that Commissioner Diaz was talking about. So I don't have any ways to install it or use this kind of, not that kind, that will diminish the downsides of it. They're just, it's downside.
That's what you had said, that if we decide to go that way, I have some.
Well,
Right, you
I
did say
would,
that.
yeah, and I can give you, no, I don't have things that would make the problems. But I will tell you that you definitely treat it as impermeable if you're going to go that way. No front yard use.
Right.
Just, I think we're all in agreement on that. I would not use it on roofs. If you go to University, it's either University of Central Florida, University of South Florida. They have all sorts of research on what plants work well on green roofs. You actually plant something on it. Don't put plastic on the roof. There's no particular need to. Do setbacks in the back and the side yards. So you can't run this up to the property line.
Right.
Why would we want to do that? Because the same reason that there are detention pond requirements. We just approved a project that had very strict, because it's near the C-51. You don't want to put something impervious right up to your property line because you're now running your runoff onto your neighbor's yard.
Right.
That's not reasonable. So I would look at as a starting point, at least look at Wellington's setbacks. I believe they're about 5 feet from the property line. That may be a problem someplace because we don't always have 5 feet to the property line, but we should require that. I would also do, again, Wellington has some pretty reasonable rules. If you're going to go this direction, can't have any irrigation near the stuff because that's a problem. You need to have shade trees planted with it if you're going to go with it because the stuff's hot. And you mentioned balance. Well, why should my yard be heated up more because somebody chooses to put something that is a known heat island problem when they could put something that is actually contributing to cooling? That's not a balance. That's letting somebody do something that causes extra harms to their neighbors. We have requirements for shade
Point of
trees.
order, Madam Mayor.
Yep.
The vice mayor has the floor and I know Commissioner
Well, all
Diaz
right,
has.
there's a workshop. We're,
Oh,
we're, yeah,
That's,
well,
okay, okay,
I mean, they are.
all right. I defer to the mayor. She is the chair of the meeting.
Um,
I think it's the only chance that people have to talk back and forth, so I'm not going to be quite as regulated.
definitely.
And I think we're sort of, let's wrap it up a little bit. I think we've,
I'm
all made
working
our
way through,
points.
way through the list here. Definitely
So far.
go. Can I,
that's just it, go far, keep going.
okay, when it's quiet, I'll keep going. Use whatever performance standards on the stuff. It's not going to make much environmental difference, but it helps in just overall usage of it. If we do anything with a permeability standard, it's got to be, find somebody who measures it with installed, not just the material itself. I believe Wellington, somebody can confirm this, but they restrict it to 15% of the lot area. After you take out the building coverage, the open space and the hardscaping, then you can go up to 15% of the rest of it.
It's not counted towards their impervious. It's a different way to look at it.
I think it's a little bit different way. I didn't look at that.
Total impermeable rate for single family. We're one of the few cities that actually have a maximum impermeable. So that might be why they chose to
Right.
do that.
Look at
Because
it and compare.
there's a
and-
lot of cities that don't have it.
One that people aren't going to like is it needs to be inspected periodically. Is it in fact working as it's supposed to? That means people who put it have to agree. If you put, since it's not in the front yard, it's in the backyard, you have to agree to allow an inspector to come in and check it out. It means we have a cost in the city to whoever that inspector is to make sure that it's doing and kept clean to it. What's that? Do people want to take that burden on? I would say if you're going to go that direction, that should be a part of it. As I was mentioning, shade trees, Wellington says, since this stuff heats up, you have to put shade trees with it. You need to leave a ring. You can't put the stuff right up to the trees because then the trees don't get enough water. So leave a 4-foot ring on trees, a 2-foot ring on shrubs or on hedges. And that your trees at maturity should be covering 75% of that plastic grass so that you're trying to reduce the heat effects of the thing. I would say as a minimum, hope somebody's taking notes on this. Otherwise I'll send them, I guess. And I think an issue that's back into how do we deal with the compliance, which is a separate one. And I don't know that we even want to tackle it today, but one thing that we should have in the back of our mind is that at least some homeowners, when they were informed that they were out of compliance, came into compliance, took the stuff out and planted the appropriate things. Some of them have come out quite well. Is it fair to those people that they took the trouble and expense to do the right thing, come into compliance, and we let other people not? I don't have an answer to that. That's part of our future discussion of figuring out how to, and I'm perfectly fine with the concept that if people have gotten out of compliance, particularly because the inclusionary code is, that's not an obvious thing for somebody to realize, well, if it doesn't say anything, that means you can't do it. It would be reasonable to interpret, well, if it doesn't say anything, it probably means I can. Let's help people out in getting to a pathway to compliance and be reasonable about timeframes and so on. So I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz.
Just to respond to the government overreach argument, because this is something that I've been hearing a lot regarding this. And, there's a little bit of irony because one of the most regulated things that we have in this state is our environment, and especially the things and the plants that we can use. I'm sure Dave McGrew can comment on try planting American cotton in your backyard from here, and it's very against the law to plant that plant here. And there's a very strong arguments on why it shouldn't be against the law. Yet we have these kinds of things all across the board. And when it comes to environmental regulation, which is largely what this is, because the commonality, the community good that we're trying to achieve with addressing this situation is we are talking about a petroleum product. We are talking about a known carcinogen that has things like PFAS, which is not an opinion. The research from UF-IFAS, which is an agency, by the way, that is not shy about using chemicals in environment, and for them to take a stance to say outright don't allow it should really tell you something about the numbers that they're getting. So the community good, the overall whole as a whole is to keep carcinogens and plastic out of our waterways and specifically out of our aquifer, which by the way is our drinking water source.
Thank you. Okay, we have all spoken. It's 7:30. We have no action tonight. In terms of, I mean, I think some of us, it sounds to me as though some limited use with regulations might be something that we can consider. Ms. Stokes?
I was just curious if staff felt like they got clear direction from us.
Well, that's
Because
what I'm just trying to do.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I stand by what I said earlier. I think by the time we add in all the regulation, it's going to be such a limited use case that I don't see the value in it.
But let me ask you a
Thanks.
question then. With the, with my statement of if that's something that someone wants to use, I mean, aside from the obvious problems and drawbacks to it, but if that's something, if we're considering it impervious and that's something someone chooses to use in their backyard, are you not in favor of allowing them to do that if it's included in their impervious area?
No, I'm not. I think if you have a big tree, you're not going to surround it with a bunch of concrete. And when you have a look you're going for in the backyard, that is a natural look that should be using real plants that provide benefits to the soil, to the community, to the environment, that I think you said it earlier when you were talking about what Commissioner Diaz was saying, that if 50% is that's our, I don't know if that is our maximum.
Yeah.
That's we're not aiming for 50%. We don't want everybody to go into their yard.
Right. And we're not, no one's suggesting that.
So I think it would take yards that otherwise would not be at that 50% threshold and now open up the door for them to say this sod, this ground cover, the stuff that I had here before, since I'm not already at my 50% threshold, I can go ahead and replace that with an impervious surface that I otherwise wouldn't have. And then now throughout the city, you're going to start seeing more impervious surface than you otherwise would have.
I mean, that's certainly conjecture.
I think it's quite reasonable conjecture because, not very many people are going to say, well, I can go up to 50% in service. Let me get this Vinny with the cement truck in here and put more cement. But they might well say, well, if I can put artificial grass, at least it looks green. I'll go ahead and do that up to the 50%. And again, that means we as a community are increasing something that is a known environmental negative that our state university has already been clear. They don't recommend it.
Okay.
Like to make
Sure.
one point though, so the public can understand. Our impermeable waters community sustainability director, the impermeable surface percentage of a lot also includes the impermeable surface of the building. So I don't want people to think I can go cover half my yard just
Okay.
by way that you're talking, is that the
Fair enough.
building lot coverage is inclusive and part of the impermeable lot coverage.
So it's not the yard, it's the lot.
It's a lot.
Okay, well, that's helpful. It's helpful. And I think cuts down on the issue. All right, so direction. Mr. Diaz.
I like the tree board's recommendations, although I would like discussion on being expressly clear on prohibition. I'm not sure we totally need that. I mean, maybe it does take I recognize our code maybe needs some cleaning up. Inclusionary code is totally acceptable. I don't think it really needs a law degree to understand it. There's probably room to clean it up. And again, revisiting our ratios of mulch to plant and offering flexibility and tools for homeowners to make better choices, you know,
And-
especially thinking about those homeowners that have, you know, very shaded properties, which we want, and, you know, are going to have no option but to have a lot of mulch or bromeliad, which are phenomenal.
Anyone want some, come and weed out mine? Free.
Yeah.
And I think you brought, I could, that'd be welcome. You brought something up earlier about, you know, looking at a broader look at the landscape. You know, I was talking to somebody today. Oh, I was talking to Erin today about trees, and, you know, I always think that the trees are too small, and she was explaining to me now it's really hard to get trees because everybody's asking for more trees. But every time I drive past the parking lot up at the North Dixie Highway, next to the
Bravo.
Bravo, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this vast expanse of asphalt that's completely never filled and never used. And across the street, the Cart's place is back out of compliance. So, you know, so should we say to staff, bring something back that allows a limited use of it, and we'll vote on that up and down, or bring it back for a review from us in terms of, you know, different options, you know, the next step. I mean, we're not voting tonight on anything. And I don't even know if we have consensus. So if the staff brought back an ordinance which had some sort of limit, you know, some sort of limited dealing with the impervious, would that be a waste of their time?
The
I
sense,
don't want them to do double duty. I mean, you know, what the tree board is recommending, I think is really great. I think we just
Well,
need,
they're recommending an all-out prohibition.
right, but I think what we're talking about in terms of helping, I don't want to punish these homeowners. I'm not interested in that, just to put that out there. And when we talk about helping them come into compliance, I'm more interested in helping them find, you know, the alternatives to the carcinogenic stuff, find more natural things and get that on board. So, you know, pervious and impervious as well. If I would obviously want a pervious driveway over something that's completely concreted over, but still that the part where the water is coming through and where the erosion is going to happen, that should not be a known carcinogen going into our waterway.
So you're saying are you saying, do I hear you saying that you want a complete ban on it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a short way to say it.
Complete ban, but we need to help them on the other side. More flexibility on our landscape code.
Had I had my way, I would allow limited use in the back, and maybe it's not half of the, you know, towards the impervious, but a percentage of the lot. You know, percentage of whatever area is after the building is there is allowable. But I think some limited use of it makes sense around a pool, a dog run, you know, a play area for kids. I think some of that makes sense, not the whole yard, certainly not the front yard. So that would be my recommendation, to go with that, with very strict requirements like you were talking about.
but
Yep, Madam City Manager. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your light on. It's on the other side.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Just a follow-up question for Commissioner Diaz. When you mentioned about you do want a prohibition, however, are you also suggesting working with those who are out of compliance right now to come into compliance, and we kind of assist them?
Right, of course. Like, you know, for example, like one of the examples, and I think it's a super reasonable argument that was brought up by one of the neighbors was, you know, they're covered in a banyan tree, lots of shade, and nothing will grow under that tree. And I think, you know, that if he can't make the ratio, that, for example, is a really good example of all mulch is totally fine, or all organic cover. You might not be able to have a lot of plants underneath there for obvious reasons, but of all the alternatives, it's much better to have an expanse of organic material over synthetic.
Okay.
I'm
And
here.
and the dog park is something that's really interesting to bring up because I just think about my day job and the work I'm doing with cyanobacteria things. And, dogs, obviously they're going to go everywhere, right? And same for cats and all wildlife. But, one of the main ingredients of every living thing's urine is uric acid. It's a nitrogen. And now, the research is leaning towards there, but we are understanding that nitrogen is a triggering mechanism for cyanobacteria blooms to turn toxic. And if you have a dog that's doing that, even on a street that goes into a storm drain or anywhere where, his urine and stuff is not going through a healthy soil, that's going to go straight into the waterway. It's not being fixed, which we call, this isn't an opinion, this is science. And it's a, ideally you want them to go over a substrate that has a healthy bacteria, all that plant matter and the stuff that's going to use up that nitrogen before it makes its way into our.
I mean, most people walk their dogs in the street and hopefully pick up the.
Hopefully pick up, but they're not, going into swale. They're, peeing hopefully on grass or plants.
Mm.
It's not surely not a perfect thing.
Weird.
but-
I feel like we're going around in circles.
Yeah.
Commissioner Malega?
No, they're using plastic bags to pick up their dog.
Right,
their
right,
Garbage,
right.
but that's a whole other conversation.
Yep.
I'm,
Was about,
I just got yelled at.
that's
I'm
where
just-
your uric acid is.
The thing about mulch is I've replaced literally mulch in my yard at least 6 times a year. You know why? Because when it rains, guess where the mulch goes? Into our drain
Into the-
system.
Right.
It goes bye-bye. So again, I'm spending more money. And again, I don't have artificial turf in my yard. I continue to reinvest and put the mulch down, not rubber. Even though I really wanted to do rubber. You know where I stand. I've said yes. I've said it 3 times in a small amount. If it's part of the impervious service, that's where I stand. But I don't want to make staff chase their tail for no reason.
Well, that's a great example. I'm not yelling at you. Sorry if you thought of it that way, but that's a really great example. You don't, on the other end, you don't want a yard that's entirely made of mulch because that will clog up drains, but that's where the ratio comes into play in terms of buffer zones and containing those areas so it doesn't wash out. I mean, very similarly with plastic grass, if you're using silica sand, you need, something to contain it. Otherwise that ends up in our drains as well. And that ends up like cement. But our code as an environmentally friendly town, aligning ourselves with Florida friendly landscape and IFAS guidance, I feel needs to be heavily leaning towards protecting soil health, all the bacteria, mycelium, all that good stuff, and discouraging anything, where there's another alternative like mulch or gravel or whatnot that will take care of that.
I'm at a loss for words.
Should we hear public comment
doesn't-
now? I just,
Well, we really
We're not
had.
taking public comment.
okay, but the lawyer said that we have to listen to public comment before we make an action on this. So do we?
We're not taking an action.
Not
Okay.
taking action.
We're not taking action.
But if we're giving staff, I'm just asking, are we gonna hear from the public when staff comes back with something? When it's
One
already been
of the-
written and
can
too
I-
long?
There's, oh God, it's been a long day. There's an argument for yes, but there's also an argument for people that knew that there was not public comment and didn't come because they knew there was.
I
no
know, I'm just
public
asking,
comment.
when would we hear from the public if
When
we're
we
gonna
come-
send
when it
staff
comes
off to
for
write this thing
first
saying that,
reading.
no, we're not
Well,
allowing
number
it?
one, I know that I have, and I welcome any more comments. I'm sure we all have gotten letters and emails and messages from people about this. And I encourage that. I looked tonight, there were nothing, no public comments to the clerk about this. Because they know that, sir, because there's no public comment. So I think if we let people do have public comment tonight, then that's unfair to the people that didn't. Okay, so, but we have a meeting coming up on Tuesday. And they can come up on non-agenda items or put a public comment to be read. They don't have to be here about this. So, I mean, that's, the public can be heard. It just right now I just think it's unfair to the people that didn't make a public comment.
Do we want to hear public comment before we get staff direction, or we're just gonna say, that's what my question.
Okay, well, let's welcome public comment from the public on the 18th. Write your comments. We don't make decisions based on 5 people were against it and 7 people were for it, but we do listen to what the. what the
May I
public
make a
has to say.
suggestion? It appears you
Please
have
do.
2 options. One, it appears the consensus is that you would like us to bring back the tree board's recommendation of a strict prohibition written into the code.
I don't stand with that.
I said that the consensus appears to be that's
Okay.
I'm just canvassing the comments from 3 people, and 3 is sort of one direction. If that were to be made into the LDRs, it has to go before the planning and zoning board, the preservation board, and then 2 readings before you. So there's 4 opportunities for public comment.
Okay.
If there's a middle ground that you arrive at some point tonight and direct staff to do something other than that, that's also going to have to become changes to the LDRs, which is another 4 public hearings, of which there'll be 4 opportunities for the public to speak. It would be nice if we had some consensus of direction of which route you would like us to go.
And while that process is happening, we would not be enforcing at the same time, correct?
The non-enforcement will continue.
Okay.
We will continue to work. People have come and asked, knowing, I guess, getting some intimation of where you lean, have been asking, how can they come into compliance? We're working very feverishly on this living ground cover brochure that if you plant these types of things at this size, at this spacing, it will be considered in compliance.
Mhm.
And Dave gets lots of calls on those. So.
I feel like the bulk of the conversation tonight's been around the artificial turf, and that is one thing that we've heard a lot about. But the other one is the like xeriscaping and all of that. So we didn't dive into any of this. And I think you might have said something, Commissioner Diaz, that caught, can we be more flexible here? I agree. We don't want that whole yard covered with rocks. We need plants in there. We need things that are alive in there. Trees don't count. And I'm curious about that because, like you said, if we have a big tree and nothing grows under it, can we allow more mulch or more rock? So this is an area where I feel like we could try to look for some more flexibility and improvement, and we haven't had the opportunity to dig into.
But tonight really was about the artificial turf. I mean, I think we
Well,
agree that.
there's a lot of cases in my district on this particular issue right here. And this isn't rip out, artificial turf and put something down. We're talking about redesigning your yard and having clear rules on how many bushes do I need to plant to come into compliance? How do I hit that 50% threshold? How do I make sure, because it's not like Aaron said, today I'm going to plant enough plants to cover 50%. They need time to grow and do things.
Right, but I think, doesn't the staff work with people when they come in on plans and stuff in terms of what they can plant?
We do, it has come to our attention though, because our code officers are not plant experts. So this is where we wanted to go ahead and prepare this planting guidance so that our code officers have and our homeowners have an additional tool to be clear. And really what the goal is for compliance, because you're cited and then you're given time to comply. Really at the end of compliance, you should be, because the code compliance can give you lots of time to comply, you should meet the 50% requirement. So you plant and then what we've been doing is a second inspection in 6 months. So if you have to plant so that you comply in 6 months, the violation is issued. And then they come up with the planting plan and then they have time for the plants to grow is how we've kind of been working it out. And landscape and Dave and planning and zoning have been working with code compliance on these specific cases for a remediation plan. We've started this process of a second inspection.
And that's going on.
Well, it's on hold right now,
But okay.
but because it wasn't working the other way before as well. So this is what we've talked about is that in order for your case to be complied, the end result has to be the 50% that's grown. Because what was happening in the other instance was basically people were planting to the required level to make the 50% coverage.
And then they had too much.
And they weren't watering it. So then all the plants died. And then they're back in code issue and then they're a repeat violator. So the discussion was instead of put them in a repeat violation situation is to, what we've kind of looked at is to work with them, get a planting plan, put the plants, give them the time for the plants to grow, which the standard is that it should do 50% within 6 months. And so give them 6 months and then for everything to grow
And to get
and then-
established.
and then do a final inspection to result the violation, but they would not be accruing fines. It would be working with code to resolve the issue.
Do we have to treat like every code compliance case the same? I know we talked at a code compliance option in the workshop in the past, how we wanted to make sure that we weren't coming off as too punitive, that we weren't going to take your house away from you, that, I think it's very intimidating to, miss mowing. This happened to me when I was pregnant with my first child. Like, we didn't mow our yard. Somebody called it in and we got a notice, like, you better come in. The way I read it at the time, maybe it was the hormones, I don't know. But the way I read it at the time was, you better get your grass mowed, come into compliance. If you don't, this and this is going to happen. And like,
Let William take the
It
question.
doesn't have, and I will, misspoke. I will say to you that I have often for years said that the language that we use, some of it's statutory, but the way that code notices are presented to people is extremely intimidating, because when I get a letter or, when in court, in law, when I get a motion, you start reading and you start, whoa. And I think now it's bolded, at least
It's bolded, and much of it is statutory to apprise the property owner of the entire process of 162 that you are going through when it comes to code compliance. Because we don't do a 2-part notice, we do a 1-part notice, which is one reason why it's all spelled out. Now, we are increasingly using courtesy notices, which is a much softer code compliance.
is it a letter or a door hanger?
It can be a door hanger. Sometimes it is a letter, because if we go to a establishment and it's something minor and it's not inhabited, there's no point in leaving a door hanger because nobody's going to get it.
Right.
I had to train staff not to do that, but that's in the past. So we have 3 ways to go about it. And then keep in mind that at each stage of the game, the time to comply the property is provided. So let's say that you get a courtesy notice to deal with your landscaping. You work with Dave in co-compliance. You have your 6 months, or maybe it's 7 months to get it done. If it doesn't happen, then it may turn into a regular letter, which provides an additional 6 or 7 months to get it in compliance. And if it's still not in compliance, it's going to go to the magistrate, and the magistrate at that point will give you about 6 or 7 months. So you could be in the co-compliance process.
6 and 7 months.
Well, if it's for landscaping, what we're talking about with ground cover, we can't tell them, okay, plant it and you're off the hook.
Right.
And it just dies. So
Kind of like the auto parts store.
and that's what we're trying to do. God, they're driving me crazy.
I will torture you forever about that.
I just want to go get my little chipping hammer
I
and
know,
dig
me
out
too.
part of a sidewalk and plant plants
Makes
there.
me crazy.
If I get caught by PPSO, please come get me out of jail.
I will bail you out.
Okay, thank you. So, the entire process can take, 200, at that point, 221 months, which might be 2 years before
Wow.
someone's actually through the whole thing.
but you don't feel good about that, a giant part of that process when you're like dealing with legal issues in the magistrate. It's not like, oh, I have a year to come in compliance and it's going to be nice and low stress. It's like, you've got.
Well,
very
and what I've described is
work
two,
with the
is two periods of time where you're working with staff and collaborating with staff before you ever get to the magistrate.
Yeah.
We don't want you to go to the magistrate. It's a lot of work to get to a case to the magistrate. So we prefer you to sort of cooperate and work with staff and come up with a plan. If you don't have enough money, we take that in consideration. We take a lot of things in consideration. And as long as you're proactively working with staff
They
to
will
come
send
to a resolution, we will support you. And we will actually also postpone your cases if, extenuating circumstances come up. And there's lots of extenuating circumstances that come up. As long as we're aware of them, we'll work with you.
Okay.
It's those that say silent that then all of a sudden, tell me, oh, I bought a property and I didn't know anything happened. And then I go back in the records and I'm like, well, yes, you did. Your title company called us. You were apprised of the case. You were apprised of all this. Please don't tell me you didn't know, because you only didn't know because your title company didn't tell you.
I've heard from residents like, oh, Dave came out and he was amazing and he gave us specific plants and he told us like how to do this. And I've heard positive results then. And then I've heard it from other people that said, I've had staff come out and I asked for specific recommendations and they said I was told not to give actual recommendations. I can just tell you what the rules are.
And that's the
you need
difference
to-
between the co-compliance officer and working with Dave.
So how do we make sure everybody?
And that's what they're working on, is this little primer that the code officers can have and say, look at this. And if you have questions about it, follow up with Dave. And what's also happened, which Aaron was describing, entity goes and plants their yard. Dave comes out and says it looks to be fine. And then some other inspection comes up later, or they get turned in 9 months later, and then they aren't in compliance anymore. Their plants all died. Well, they're really upset because Dave told me it was fine and the plants may be still there, but they're dead, but they can't pass a use and occupancy inspection. So we're trying to close that loop that you've got to get your plants established. You just can't put them in the ground and then walk away like our favorite friend with the bougainvillea, because that bougainvillea's been planted over like 10 times and it's just goes and it dies within a month. So it's an uncomfortable circle for everybody.
And I think people know, I mean, I did work. I mean, part of what my practice was before I was elected was representing people that are having issues with code enforcement and zoning in the city. So we've had our moments. And I mean, I think it's not an unfair statement to say that there is a certain amount of inconsistency with how codes are complied or how people interpret the codes. And I think that we need to, when a citizen does come and say, listen, what about this? You know, like it's interpreted by Bob, but Sue or not Sue, you know, Jane might interpret it differently. And to be able to have a bit of a more open mind when someone comes, and that was, again, my experience and some of the people were great. You know, like, okay, let's look at this and come to some sort of resolution about what's the best way to deal with it. I had one, it took 1.5 years for one of my clients to finally convince the staff member that he was not in violation. And it took another staff member after 1.5 years to say, yeah, he's not in violation. So there are frustrating moments with code. I mean, I'm the first one here to say that. I have many years of personal experience. So, but that's like a different topic for a different day. We are now in 6 minutes to going home. Mr. McVoy, at the end.
I was just going to say one very specific thing. As you're working on that primer with the different plants, I would say put it at the front, put it at the back, irrigation. That even if they're native plants, and David certainly knows this, and I'm sure he's telling people, you've got to have irrigation for probably the first year of some sort. Doesn't have to be major irrigation. It can be drip irrigation that's relatively inexpensive, that you can put in for a while and take out after a while. But we get very dry to start, you know, up until a week ago. So you know, irrigation is a big deal.
Which raises, and I'm good. It's interesting because I mean, yes, you have to, but I mean, if I have one of those, if I go to Home Depot and get one of those things that goes back and forth and my plants live and they survive with that, why would we have to make them put in expensive?
No, 100%.
Okay.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
what the technology is.
Okay.
The
You
back
have to
and
keep it
forth is-
alive.
You gotta keep them watered, and it may be more water than you think if
Mhm.
it's,
Mhm.
you know.
Well, they're getting
November to-
established.
Right.
They might be more drought resistant in the long run, but initially you have to get them established.
And
keep
that
them.
initially may
Yeah.
be as much as 2 years, depending on
Right.
what you're planting.
Okay, we've
Or
got
plant.
5 more minutes till we can go home. And I see Mr. Diaz is light on again.
Rain barrels are a good alternative
Yep.
for that, especially this week. My question is, you know, is there a time frame on when this guidebook can become available? Because that seems to be the key missing link, right? Is like Dave. So we're a special town because we have Dave and he's an arborist, which is pretty rare. And a lot of other municipalities have expressed their jealousy of us because of that. But there's only one Dave and he can't do so many site visits. So
We have the list ready. It's not pretty, but we could start rolling out it's just a simple, I mean, I'll show you what it looks like. We usually try to have our stuff be a little more professionally organized. So we have plans to send this to Crabtree to work out so that it's a little user friendly, but we could roll this out in this kind of Excel format, basically, or Word table with our code officers. But we want to get it like ready. So that's going to take time. We have all the photos finalized. We have the standards. Like I said, we have these set plants and it's not inclusive to all potential plant material, but it's the commonly used and with a focus on native ground material. So the data is there, the photos are there. It's just getting that to, and we kind of want to wait for tonight as well.
Right.
And then, and before we
Make
send
the
it
big
away
announcement.
to get printed and spend the money to have.
Well,
people sign.
also the collateral material will be made ADA compliant, so it can be placed on the city's website, which we've done very quickly for the affordable housing program, the building design standards, the new city's business license brochure, all that's on, and Crabtree turns things around quick. So we should be able to have it on the website, I would think, definitely by the end of May, predicated on what she just said in terms of the draft.
Okay, here's a suggestion. We talked about how to get the word out to different people. Would it be a good idea, do you think? I mean, at this point, it's not, artificial grass is not allowed. Would it be helpful if we put in our electric utility, mailer that, some people do have, and we understand that, but if you don't have